Now, I gotta be honest. This episode of The Strain, without any kind of introduction to the video or anything, was pretty freaking good. I'll be honest. Now, notably more exciting than the last episode, which, I'm not one of those people who needs an action packed episode every week. I mean, I like to consider myself a fairly patient person. However, in something like this, I think it's all the more gratifying when something, seeing as they do take their time so much with this show and not really blowing all of their load at once. I think it's all the more gratifying when they do have an episode like this where you really get some perspective on just how desperate a situation they are in. Because this episode, not only did we see the vampire's base of operations, we also got our best look yet at the Master, who still, I first said he looks like Nosferatu, which he kind of does, but he doesn't have a nose, at least not that I can remember, and he has these really piercing red glowing eyes. So I'm guessing that they took inspiration from Dracula, because in Dracula the book he's described as having these very piercing red eyes that can basically stop a man in his tracks. So that may or may not have been their inspiration, but again, given the source material or given the subject matter, I wouldn't put it past them. But basically, the plot of this one is that the main group of, I guess you could call them protagonists. I mean, some of them are more gray area than others, but basically, F, Nora, Satrakian, and Fett venture down into the subway, and their basic goal is to kill the Master. They are putting their plan into action. Needless to say, with 2 episodes left in the season, along with the second season already greenlit, as far as I know, they don't succeed. Which, that's not always the death. That does not always mean the death of drama or the death of tension, because really, it's the journey that matters, not so much the destination. So with that being said, I actually thought this episode, more than any of the others before it, was really where it embraced its horror roots. I mean, you had the heroes venturing around in the dark. You had them shining the lights in the dark to see where the monsters were. You saw the monsters coming out of the darkness. You saw really, this was the most haunted house-y of the entire season thus far, which, given the scenario, isn't all that surprising. Now, I can't really comment on the sets too much because the sets are as good as you'd expect. I mean, they find this underground network of passageways and foundations. I mean, they're under the World Trade Center, so, which the explanation that they give is that vampires feed on a place that's full of misery. I guess there's no more miserable place in New York than the World Trade Center. However, aside from that, like I said, the lighting was very ominous. I like the way that they kind of mixed traditional, I'm just going to say orange light, traditional light like there is right here, with the UV lights that they've established hurts the vampires. I mean, they had these UV lights with shoulder straps that they were carrying around with them. So, in addition to a few conventional weapons like swords and Jim Kent's knife, whatnot. But yeah, I really like this episode because not only was it could it work as a fairly self-contained journey like through the subway, but again, last episode I felt did do the emotional and personal stuff well, and really hammer home the drama of F not really knowing where his wife is. But here it perfectly balanced that with the more exciting stuff, the hunting vampires and seeing the Master. I think it blended those two elements really well. To a pretty nail-biting finale, I have to say, when the Master did finally show himself to F. I mean, F is a guy who, as far as we've seen, always believes in the scientific or medical explanation for things. Seeing the Master in the flesh, and finally and finally proving Satrakian to be right with everything he said, despite how ridiculously supernatural it sounds. Seeing that written all over Corey Stoll's face throughout the entire episode, and especially in this one scene where he's trying to find his wife and he sees the Master, I actually thought that was really well acted by Corey Stoll. I mean, just the disbelief and the feeling, him and Mia Maestro, really, the feeling that everything they've been brought up to believe, that they've been brought up to look for in a plague like this, is just rendered completely void. Really, Kevin Durand Fett put it best when he said, I'm not gonna try and do his accent, but he basically said, or does it bother you that me and the old man know more about what's going on than you do? Or something along those lines, which, that puts a few things into perspective. As a sort of B-plot, which wasn't as interesting, well, there were a few subplots. One subplot that was the least interesting was, surprise, surprise, the one involving the kid, F's son. Now, I will say that this one wasn't bad, but in comparison to the rest of the stuff going on in this episode, it just wasn't as interesting. On the surface, it comes across as just a completely unrelated plot, because they put the kid in charge of taking care of and holding down the fort with Nora's mother, who, as we've established at this point, has a severe case of Alzheimer's. So she's constantly coming to the kid saying, where is my ashtray? Where is my daughter? Where is my cigarettes? So the kid has to take care of her. And on the surface, like I said, it seems like he's just going to get cigarettes, then he brings it back, conflict over. But really what they were trying to get across, and I thought they got across pretty well, was the fact that he's really coming into his own and really trying to be, or taking one of the first steps toward being self-sufficient and being able to take care of himself in this really harsh world, which, if this world continues to progress into madness, which we saw more of this episode in the New York City streets, that may be a skill that he will find invaluable. And the second B plot actually had to do with Gus. Now, one thing I was a little disappointed with is the fact that even at this point, when we're almost done with the season, we still haven't really figured out how Gus ties into all the other characters, because all the rest of the characters have connected by this point. They have met. Most of them are now working together. Gus, I would say he's kind of like Annabeth Gish in The Bridge, but that would imply that he's not interesting. I do think he's interesting, and Miguel Gomez does play him well. But again, it just seems kind of separated from everything else that's going on, and separated from the seasonal arc. Really, Gus seems, and his whole plot line, it seems very isolated. And that did not change with this episode, although, again, I found it more interesting than F's son and his little journey this episode, because Gus lost his mom. I mean, his mom and his brother, I think. I don't know. My memory is shot, but I'm just so tired. But basically, Gus lost his mom, and he's basically going around. We can assume anyway he's going to go around and kill these vampires with this axe, as this sort of freelance crusader. I mean, he really doesn't have anything left, according to him. I mean, if his reaction was any indication, and not being able to be there for his mom. I'm trying to think if I've seen Miguel Gomez in anything else. I don't think I have. Which, if this is his first time, he's doing a good job. Yeah, like I said, the most interesting plot was down in the subway with the four main protagonists up to this point, and again, it all built to a very nail-biting climax. That actually led to a pretty interesting cliffhanger when they discover that the Master has escaped, and in the way between him and the heroes lie this whole army of vampires. And Satrakian is like, we must follow the Master. We can't let him get away. And the other guys are like, come on, it's suicide. So I don't really know what's going to happen to that. I mean, the assumption, if we were just to take the end of the episode and how the episode ended by itself, I would assume that they just forced him out of the subway. But the next episode may very well pick up just seconds after this episode ended. So I don't really know, but man, am I more interested than ever. I know I've said that before, but Wow, The Strain really impressed me with this episode. It was a marked improvement over the last episode, which again I thought was good, but this one just blew it completely out of the water. This was one of the best episodes of the season. I thought it was suspenseful. I thought it was well acted. I thought it was well written. I thought it was well lit. I like the interaction between the characters. I like the little journey that they have in this one. I like their encounters with the vampires. Almost everything in this episode I like. And man, I'm really looking forward to seeing how this season ends and subsequently how it goes into a season 2, because I honestly do think this show has potential. This show, so far at least, has really found its footing. Season 1 in a lot of TV shows is, I think, a good place to iron out some kinks, and I don't really think this was any exception. And I think in addition to that, they really had to set up all these characters in this world and had to show this really gradual progression into what we have now, which is, the world, or at least New York, falling apart from this vampire plague. So yeah, I think we're at least in terms of material and how interesting everything is. I think the least interesting is over, although that may be a little premature of me to say since we're not even through the first season yet. But I digress. Really good episode. Watch it, and if I'm not mistaken, tomorrow night is the season premiere of Gotham, so I'm finally going to get a chance to see how that comes out, and I will talk more about that tomorrow night. So until then.